The year is 1987. Steve Jobs, former leader of the Macintosh development team, was long gone, but the product he helped create remained and proved to be rather successful. Regardless, Apple continued to look towards the future. Seeing the revolutions originally brought forth by personal computers like the Apple II and graphical user interfaces on the Macintosh, one couldn't help but wonder, what's next? Steve Sackerman asked himself that same question. He had worked at Apple for 3 years on the highly successful Macintosh II line of computers, but grew bored of creating Mac clones in the same way he had making DOS clones at HP before coming to Apple. He was ready to leave Apple and start a new company based on his own pet project, a computer utilizing a pen-based interface, but Jean-Louis Gasset, his manager, persuaded him against it. They eventually reached the agreement that Sackerman could lead a team for his project, and Gasset would isolate them from what he called the corporate immune system. Just like the Macintosh group had done years before, Sackerman found a warehouse near the Apple campus where his team could work without corporate interference, and moved in that year. Sackerman codenamed his project Newton, after Isaac Newton, because of his appearance on the Apple logo, and selected a dream team for his project, including Steve Capps, a member of the original Macintosh team, and Mike Colbert from the AT&T. Despite the talent behind it, as a consequence for the project's secrecy, it lacked direction. Rather than trying to build a viable product, the Newton had become an $8,000 no-compromises tablet. The device was the same dimensions as a sheet of 8.5 by 11-inch paper, held two 20 MHz Hobbit processors, the same power as 2 to 3 of the most powerful Macs available at the time, and used a magnetic digitizer for the pen. Some planned features like the 4-shade active matrix LCD display and RF LANs weren't even available at the time. Needless to say, with such an expensive experimental product, management started to grow skeptical. Frustrated, Gasset and Sackerman both quit in 1990, leaving nobody to defend the Newton Group. Years earlier, John Sculley had conceptualized the Knowledge Navigator, what he believed the next big step in computing would be after the Macintosh. The device, which resembled modern tablets like the iPad, included multimedia capabilities, wireless networking, and intelligent agents. At the same time, a similar project, called Pocket Crystal, was also in development. Curious about the Newton project, Sculley sent over Larry Tesler to see what, if anything, could be salvaged over to Pocket Crystal. Tesler was so impressed by the Newton, though, that he convinced Sculley to keep it. Pocket Crystal eventually went on to become the spin-off company General Magic, who saw some success before going out of business in 2002. After a successful demo of a Newton prototype, which was just a screen being controlled by a Macintosh, Sculley was convinced. He set a goal for the team to have a product out within 2 years at a price of under $1,500. Ridiculous considering the Figaro prototypes of the time were still around $6,000. Michael Chow, a marketing manager and new member of the team, suggested the idea of a much smaller and cheaper Newton, which was nicknamed the Junior, while Tesler championed the No Compromises Senior model. Seeing similarities with the failed No Compromises Macintosh Portable, Sculley decided to focus solely on the Junior model until its release, and then continue development on the Senior. But as time went on, the Senior was cancelled entirely. At the same time, arguments had been exchanged over which processor and language the Newton would use. At first, the team looked into low-power processors like the AT&T CRISP, C Reduced Instruction Set processor, nicknamed the Hobbit. A new, more powerful language named Ralph was also in the works for the Newton, though, which wouldn't have worked as well on the CRISP processor, so the search continued. The Newton team then considered the ARM processor by computer manufacturer Acorn and bought a 43% stake in the company. The ARM was certainly more efficient than other processors, but wasn't powerful enough to run Ralph. A pared-down version of the language, Dylan, was in development, but wouldn't be ready soon enough, causing the Newton team to settle on C, ironically the ideal language for the Hobbit processor they had first considered. For the longest time, the Newton project had been a major secret at Apple, but at CES in 1992, John Sculley announced his concept for a new type of device merging the portability of a pocket organizer and the power of a computer. He called it a personal digital assistant. At the next CES, a prototype of the Newton was demonstrated. The demo had a few issues ranging from dead batteries to someone attempting to steal one of the press kits, but with Michael Chow assembling and faxing a pizza order from the device, the crowd was impressed. The Newton didn't just gain the attention of the press, it also caught the eyes of many other companies. Some formed partnerships with Apple, like Sharp, while others went on to develop competing products like the Casio Zoomer and the Amstrad PenPad. This competition and the fast-approaching 1993 deadline meant that the Newton team couldn't rest. Steve Capps had wired his home with a remote terminal so that he didn't have to be at the office to work on code. He even got married during the project and returned to work on the same day. 18-hour workdays did little to alleviate the mounting stress within the group though, and tragically led to software engineer Ko Isano taking his own life. After less than impressive demos at CES 1993 and CeBIT, public interest in Newton had faded. On top of that, the handwriting recognition engine the Newton used was faulty. Stepan Pashikov had handed over his calligrapher engine on a floppy disk in a hotel to Apple employee Al Eisenstadt in Moscow back in 1987. After formal negotiations with Pashikov's company Paragraph, it was agreed that the software would be licensed to Apple and would have a 95% rate of accuracy. Actual rates were far lower, though Pashikov argued that he could have improved his software if Apple had given him more information about the Newton project. Regardless, marketing reduced focus on Newton's handwriting abilities and branded the device as an intelligent communications tool instead. As the launch date drew near, the Newton software was finalized and units were finally mass-produced. Even then, there were still a few flaws with the Newton that would need to be resolved. Many of the Newtons that had shown up at Apple headquarters off the production line had encountered a manufacturing flaw where the rubber pads on the bottom of the device weren't properly attached. A group of employees had to spend the entire day gluing the feet back on. Also, due to a software glitch, many of the Newton's getting started cards wouldn't run properly, meaning that 2,000 units would need to be patched. To top off all of the pre-launch stress, the Newton was slated for a live demo in Good Morning America. Part of that demo included sending a fax to Des Moines, an area already notorious for faulty phone connections. However, in this case, also an area experiencing severe flooding. All attempts to make contact before the show had failed, and it was up to chance if the demo would work or not. Thankfully, in the end it did work, and in front of 16 million viewers. Chow showed off all the features of the Newton without a hitch, and even managed to send the fax. The Newton had a rather successful launch at Macworld 1993, but a few months after, interest stagnated. The device's handwriting recognition was lampooned in comics and even on an episode of The Simpsons.
Take a memo on your Newton. Beat up Martin. Bah!
With future releases of the Newton OS, the handwriting recognition would eventually be fixed, but by then it was far too late to regain public attention. Apple tried to retool the device several times, releasing 8 different versions, not including other models made by Sharp, Motorola, and others, but it never did catch on. In 1998, Steve Jobs returned to Apple and killed off the Newton for good. Jobs was never a fan of the Newton, in part because it was John Scully's project, but also because he hated the idea of the stylus. In his words, "God gave us 10 styluses, let's not invent another." Even though the Newton was officially discontinued by Apple in 1998, plenty of devoted fans around the globe have done their part to keep it alive. Forums like Newton Talk are still used to this day, along with blogs like My Apple Newton who put out plenty of interesting information about the Newton, sometimes even from a Newton. Some more dedicated Newtonians even held a few conferences around the globe. Most important to me, though, is the United Network of Newton Archives, a massive online collection of Newton software and documentation available to anyone for free. The technology behind the Newton was remarkably ahead of its time, and so it's a small wonder that even though its initial release failed, many of the ideas and their creators went on to live another day. 2 developers from the Newton team went on to form Pixo, a developer for handheld devices that worked on the first iPod. Stepan Pashikov would later create Evernote, an app that includes handwriting recognition. In fact, the improved handwriting engine in Newton OS 2, Rosetta, found its way onto OS 10 as Inkwell. And the ARM processor that Apple helped develop for the Newton now beats in almost every smartphone and tablet made today. The Newton may not have met Sackeman's original vision, it may not have been an instant success, and it may not have ever really taken off, but the groundwork it laid in proving that portable computers could be more than toys, touch interfaces were the future, and that such a communications tool would be practical paved the way for the smartphones we use today. Whether he knew it or not when naming his project, Sackeman couldn't have been more accurate with Newton. In the same way that Isaac Newton had revolutionized physics, pocket-sized devices like the Newton message pad had revolutionized computing.